And welcome. Let's try that again. Good morning. Thank you. And welcome to the home of Unitarian Universalism in Central Washington. My name is Mariah Madsen, and I'll be your celebrant this morning. Our worship leader is Lynn Madsen. I did practice. If you are a visitor this morning, we are so glad you're here. We welcome every person of goodwill just as you are. Whatever body you inhabit, whomever you love, whatever your age, you're welcome here. We invite everyone to continue our communion with coffee and treats informally after the service, both in person or on Zoom. For the folks on Zoom, you'll find the order of service in the chat. Our service today is about healing. It may stir up feelings. Many of us carry unhealed pain. If that happens, we encourage you to allow those feelings to move rather than hold them. If someone next to you cries, offer them a hand to hold or a shoulder to lean into. Pain shared is pain diminished. I am so happy that you are happy to be here and happy to be here with each other. There may be some announcements up on the loop, and if there are not, you can be entertained while I remind you that there will be a survey from the worship team to help us with our planning for the upcoming year. It should appear in your email, and we will have it available as hard copy here at CUUF. Okay. Our fellowship is located on the ancestral homelands of the Pasquosa people. For thousands of years, the Pasquosa have been stewards of this land, fishing, hunting, gathering plants for food and medicine, and practicing their cultural traditions. The Pasquosa still live here. On a day when we meet to explore healing, it would not do to forget the wounds experienced by Indigenous people from the loss of their ancestral lands, language, and culture. Hear the words from the Hidatsa elder, Wahini. I cannot forget our old ways. Often in summer, I rise at daybreak and steal out to the cornfields, and as I hoe the corn, I sing to it, as we did when I was young. No one cares for our corn songs now. Sometimes in the evening, I sit, looking out at the big Missouri. The sun sets, and dusk steals over the water. In the shadows, I seem again to see our Indian village, with smoke curling upwards from the earth lodges, and in the river's roar, I hear the yells of the warriors and the laughter of little children as of old. But it is an old woman's dream, and then I see shadows and hear only the roar of the river, and tears come to my eyes. Our Indian life, I know, is gone forever. We stand alongside our Indigenous neighbors as they continue their traditions and seek to have all their rights recognized and restored. We acknowledge our shared responsibility to sustain right relationships with each other and the land. The chalice and flame are a symbol of our congregation gathered in principles and faith. If you at home have a chalice with you, please light it now. Join us now in lighting it. Here in the sanctuary, we will speak the lighting words on the screen and in your order of service together. Come into the circle of light. Come into this well of compassion. Come into this loving. Let your sorrows be healed. Screw up the most important part.
Children through their classes. Now go with each other to find meaning in the spirit of love that we share. Now go with each other to find meaning in the spirit of love that we share.
Some perspectives on healing. From Behavioral Science by Brené Brown. Pain will subside only when we acknowledge it and care for it. Addressing it with love and compassion would take only a minuscule percent of our energy it takes to fight it, but approaching pain head-on is terrifying. Our families and culture believed that the vulnerability that it takes to acknowledge pain was weakness, so we were taught anger, rage, and denial instead. But what we know now is that when we deny our emotion, it owns us. When we own our emotion, we can rebuild and find our way through pain. From the Buddhist Perspective by Pema Chodron. The idea of karma is that you continually get the teachings that you need to open your heart. To the degree that you didn't understand in the past how to stop protecting your soft spot, how to stop armoring your heart, you're given the gift of teachings in the form of your life to give you everything you need to open further. Nothing ever goes away until it was taught us what we need to know. Nothing ever really attacks us except our own confusion. Perhaps there is no solid obstacle except our own need to protect ourselves from being touched. Maybe the only enemy is that we don't like the way reality is now and therefore wish it would go away fast. But what we find is that nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. From Lived Experience by Audre Lorde, Black, lesbian, mother warrior poet. Tell them about how you're never really a whole person if you remain silent, because there's always that one little piece inside you that wants to be spoken out. And if you keep ignoring it, it gets madder and madder and hotter and hotter. And if you don't speak it out one day, it will just up and punch you in the mouth from the inside.
Healing. So this service came about because a client of mine I was working with one day, some old stuff came up, right? And he had done this work a long time ago in his 20s. Now he's 50. And it came up in the context of a new family. And he was mad. He said, I did that stuff. I looked at that. I put that in a bag with rocks and I threw it in the river and I put it downstream. And I said, well, that's not the way that really works. And he said, because he knows I preach sometimes, he said, you ought to do a service about that. And so foolishly I agreed. And the longer I've been working on this service, the more I thought I probably should have tackled something simple like Gaza. This is complicated. It's complicated, and I've been doing this over 50 years. I got my first professional job in mental health in 1973. And almost all of that time I've been working in social services or mental health. And so I figured, well, it'd be pretty easy to put this together. Yeah, no. So this is Richard Rohr, a Franciscan friar, and what he has to say about healing. If we cannot find a way to make our wounds into sacred wounds, we invariably become cynical, negative, or bitter. And I would add parenthetically, or numb. This is the storyline of many of the greatest novels, myths, and stories of every culture. If we do not transform our pain, we will most assuredly transmit it, usually to those closest to us, to our family, our neighbors, our coworkers, and invariably the most vulnerable, our children. Sacred wounds, sacred wounds. How do we do that? What are we talking about anyway? Wounds, baggage. What's baggage? So when I think about the difference between healing and feeling better, think about it's possible to feel better, and there's lots of ways to do that. So for example, a person can drink, or they can smoke pot, or they can do a kind of work, they can restructure their thinking in a way that helps them put the pain away and move on. We can compartmentalize that and we can put it on a shelf. And we can live good lives. And like, I have no judgment about that. Like, I have done all of those things, right? I drank too much, I eat too much still. I have put that stuff away in ways that allowed me to have a pretty good quality life. But it's not the same as healing, right? And it does show up in our most intimate and important relationships. So when I'm thinking about wounding, I'm thinking about our attachment process. Attachment is biology. When we are little, in these most important relationships with our parents, with the ones who take care of us, we are learning patterns of emotional response. We are learning what to expect in relationship. We are learning whether or not the world is going to be good to us, whether it is going to meet our needs, or whether it is not. And if that does not go well, and it never goes perfectly, and we don't need perfectly, but if it does not go well, then we are left with self-protective patterns. We may avoid certain kinds of feelings. We may come to believe that we are not safe. We may armor ourselves. We may be desperately looking for what it is that we did not get. And those are the things that become what I consider to be baggage and wounds that show up repeatedly in our relationships, in our habits. How many of you are familiar with the ACEs study? Adverse childhood experiences. So Kaiser Permanente down in California did a big study, and they looked at over 17,000 people's health records to think, because these were people, middle-class people for the most part, not entirely, who had serious health problems, and yet these people, by and large, knew what to do to avoid those kinds of lifestyle health problems. So they did this retrospective study, and they looked at their histories, and they looked at their health histories. And what they discovered that was a huge percentage of those people had what they came to call adverse childhood experiences. Right? Bad things happened to them. And there's a list of those. Was there domestic violence? Were you sexually abused? Was there divorce? Did somebody in your family go to prison? Those kinds of things. They have since added, did you grow up in poverty? Did you grow up in an unsafe neighborhood? The current research suggests that at least 45% of all people have from 1 to 3 of those adverse childhood experiences. An additional 37% have 4 or more. So 82% of our population has the kind of experience that could lead to what we would consider to be baggage. So we develop these kind of implicit beliefs and protective behavior patterns. And how do we change that? How do we change that? As I was thinking about this, I vacillated between kind of 2 places. Is this either going to be a professional workshop for therapists, or am I going to do what my granddaughter calls a trauma dump on all of you? And there is one story of transformation that I can share from one of my clients. When we heal, we transform. We take something typically that is held in shame, or of which we are afraid that we have disowned some part of ourselves, some behavior pattern, and we experience it in a new way. We transform it. We become less afraid of it. We understand that it is not something to be ashamed of. Like Sunny, we discover that what we have been holding in shame and hiding from everybody is in fact something that we could be proud of, something that serves us well. I worked with a young woman when she was about 15 years old. She'd been adopted from Russia, And she had some siblings. They were adopted as a sibling group. And they had been taken out of their family when she was 4 and placed first in a foster home. They'd been taken out of their original home because of abuse and neglect. The foster home was no better. They ended up in an orphanage, and that was no better. And for her entire life, as far back as she could remember, she had these horrible hallucinations. This hallucination, auditory and visual, of a black mass that would show up whenever things got difficult. And this black mass would move toward her. It got bigger and bigger and louder, and it would yell at her, "You're going to lose your parents. Everybody's going to be taken away from you. Horrible things are going to happen." It got very explicit, things that I won't share with you. And she'd been afraid to tell anybody about that because she knew at a very young age, if you tell people you have hallucinations, you get locked up and called crazy. But eventually it got to be too much. And so she shared that with a therapist. And they worked on it a lot. And one of the things they tried to do was to tell it to go away. It did not go away. It got worse and worse. And eventually she came to me, not to work on that, but to work on another piece of business. But she told me about it. And I thought, this is a fairly familiar pattern. What if this is not a threat? What if this is not a threat? What if this is a warning? What if this is a part of you that is not trying to scare you? What if this is a part of you that is trying to protect you? And when we worked on it from that point of view, when she began to see this as an out-of-control guard, right? Something warning her that something bad was about to happen, when she tracked it that way, she saw that indeed, when things got dicey at home, the voices would get louder. Right? And when she listened to it as a protective part of herself, the voices got quieter, they stopped yelling. They never went away. And when she attended to what they were saying and validated, "You're right, things are bad. And this is not the same as Russia. This is not the same as when I was growing up." That quieted and became a part of herself that she could own. Right? That's not a problem in her life anymore, this thing that she was terrified of and ashamed of. So how does this kind of a thing happen? In my experience, the most common way for healing, true healing, transformation, turning something into a sacred wound, the most common way for that to happen is in the presence of an empathetic and compassionate listener. Okay? Brené Brown reminds us, and her work is not original, it is beautiful, it validates what we have known for a long time. Shame dissolves in the presence of empathy. And so many of these things we hold in shame. So here comes the part that might be a trauma dump. As many of you know, I had a childhood that was challenging in some ways and frankly abusive in others. Right? And all my life I have been armored, been well armored, well protected. Some of you may have tried to get closer to me and discovered that there's a reason why I'm busy or I can't wait. And that's not limited to those of you that I do not know well. Right? That's true about my family as well. And I've known that that's true. I've talked about that. I've done work on it. Recently, I had an experience in therapy that was profoundly changing for me, in which I found myself sobbing and aware really for the first time of the depth and power of the terror that I have lived in. And I was crying, and the therapist asked me, "What is it that you need?" And I said, "No one has ever seen this before." No, and it was true. I had talked about my pain. I had told people about my pain. I had talked about my abuse. I had done therapy about it. But no one had ever seen me in that pain. And it was profoundly healing for me. That work is not done. The work is not done. And I'm not sure it ever is. Pema Chodron says, until you learn everything there is to be learned, it is going to come back and teach you more. And I'm certain that I am not yet finished learning that. We can change our perspective. This thing that was terrifying, that was screaming at us, can become a protector. We can show who we truly are, the things that we are ashamed of, that we do not want anybody to see. We can have those be seen in a safe and loving environment, and that will change us. We can change our perspective. For another view on this, we're going to hear from Lee Popst.
Surprised to notice that I teared up. My second surprise was that I said yes. When I was growing up, and I didn't realize it at the time, we had a family myth of being the victims. Over and over again, I heard the stories of how others didn't appreciate us, they took advantage of us, they didn't treat us fairly, other people were the problem. I read once that this is the story of the uns and the nots. We're unloved, unseen, unappreciated, uncared for, not good enough, not getting enough, not attractive enough. The list goes on and on. I think you may have your own. We play these harmful stories over and over again like hamsters on a wheel. And as adults, we continue to suffer from these wounds. Our childhood wounds are not our fault, but they are our responsibility. Richard Rohr says if we keep seeing things from the false self, and I like to call it the egoic self, we won't ever see things in a new way. Instead, we just keep replaying past wounds over and over again in our minds. To transform, we need a change of consciousness. We need an original way to see. Over 10 years ago, I was in a place in my life that really triggered my victim mentality. I was really in the trance of the victim. I was suffering. This is the moment when you hear about other people being enlightened, but that wasn't me. Something else was going on in my life, and that was the desire to do something different. I realized I was carrying on my family myth of victimhood, not something I wanted to align with anymore. I was determined to get through it in a different way. My first realization was there's negative pleasure in being the victim. The ego finds power and pleasure in being hurt. I noticed that when I repeated my victim stories to others, they too found negative pleasure in hearing the injustice, the unfairness, although I'm sure they probably felt they were being kindly supportive. But afterwards, I felt even worse, and the old neural pathways in my brain became even more entrenched. At this point, I wasn't really sure what to do, but I knew I needed to stop the stories. The next thing I did was sit down and write down every thought I had that sent me on that hamster wheel of victimhood. Thoughts like, it's unfair, they shouldn't make up lies about me, they should understand how difficult this is for me, basically blaming others, making them bad. Then thoughts of self-blame. I should have done this differently. I should have not have made a mistake. I'm not good enough. Our false self, our egoic self is always judging. It likes to compare. Am I better than? Worse than? And it likes to blame. Whenever we are defensive, we are coming from our false self. So how do we get out of this tortured cycle? What I discovered is what I now call surprise. If I tried to reason with my ego, it could outmaneuver me in seconds. It could always come up with reasons why something or someone was good or bad, right or wrong, better or worse, the way I thought things or people should be. But if I surprised the ego, it would let go. For example, if I had the thought, this is unfair, my new response was, it's okay if it's unfair. My ego didn't know what to do. There was nothing to push against. I had created a disturbance. I had created space. If I had the thought, I shouldn't have made a mistake, my new response was, it's okay if I made a mistake. Or even more radical, I'm so glad I did what I did. How do I know that's true for me? Because that's what I did. I was learning not to fight with reality. If I had a feeling such as anger, fear, dread, sadness, I learned that if I didn't attach a story to the feeling, then feelings are just feelings. I love to feel my feelings now without a story. They move through me. I am not attached. Richard Rohr says it's okay to be in the false self at times. Everyone does it. Just don't believe it. I met every one of the thoughts that hooked me with a new way of seeing, and I realized after doing this again and again, is that I was changed, transformed by the process. Thoughts still come to me. That's what they do. But now I see the universe as kind, and I accept every moment. It's okay to be human, to be real, to make mistakes, to feel. While preparing for this talk, I was reminded of the Japanese art of kintsugi, the technique of repairing a broken object by accentuating its cracks with gold instead of hiding them. It is the art of honoring past injuries and transforming your personal struggles and hardships into gold. It's a story about healing and resilience. At the beginning, I told you that I teared up when Lynn asked me to speak on this subject. I realize now being able to speak and share this with you was for me an act of kintsugi.
Our benediction today is from Laura Lynn Bellamy. If here you have found freedom, take it with you into the world. If you have found comfort, go and share it with others. If you have dreamed dreams, help one another that they may come true. If you have known love, give some back to a bruised and hurting world. And now, as we extinguish our chalice, please join with me in saying the words printed in the order of service or up on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Now, if you join hands in a circle or shoulder to shoulder.